All right, the time is 5:05, so we're going to start about now. Good evening again to everyone, and a special welcome to the first Deputy Speaker. I think his network just went off. Okay, I found him. Good evening, sir. It's so good to have you here this evening. Thank you for honoring our invitation to be here this evening.
I'm very happy to be here, and I hope that you hear me now also.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. All right,
Excellent.
so I'll just take your recitation and then we'll start. All right, so with us today is the first Deputy Speaker of the Swedish Parliament, Mr. Kenneth G. Forslund. He belongs to the Social Democratic Party, and his constituency is the Västra Götaland County West. Mr. Kenneth G. Forslund lives in Kungälv with his partner and 2 grown children. These are some of the assignments and posts he has held as the Riksdag. The first Deputy Speaker, 2022, Deputy Member of the Committee on Defense, 2022, Deputy Member of the Committee on EU Affairs, 2022, Chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, 2014 to 2022, Member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, 2002 to 2014, Deputy Member of the Committee on EU Affairs, 2011 to 2012, Member of the Committee on EU Affairs, 2003 to 2008, Member of the Riksdag for Västra Götaland County West. He has also held some municipal and regional assignments as the alternate member and member of the Kungälv Municipal Council. He's also the alternate member of Kungälv Municipal Executive Board and its working committee. He's also the alternative member and member of Bohuslän County Council's Public Health Board for Kungälv. Other engagements, Mr. Kenneth G. Forslund is currently the board member of the Olof Palme International Center. He was the member of the Defense Commission from 2017 to 2022, and he was the deputy board member of the Kungälv Housing Foundation from 1995 to 2002. Some of his party assignments include Chair of the Social Democratic Party in Bohuslän, 2007 to 2017, alternate member of the National Board of the Swedish Social Democratic Party, 2009 to 2017, the chair of the Swedish Social Democratic Youth League in Kungälv and other branches of the Swedish Social Democratic Youth League. He's also the chair of the Swedish Social Democratic Youth League in Bohuslän, a post he held from 2009 to 2017. He has been educated in public administration, specializing in economics and statistics. And he has also taken an electricity course, specializing in low voltage via a municipal adult education scheme, and a 3-year upper secondary education in economics, specializing in accounting. We have with us this evening the first Deputy Speaker all the way from Sweden, joining us of the Swedish Parliament. It is such an honor and such privilege. We truly appreciate the privilege of having you this evening, sir. And it's so glad to have you here with us at the Electoral College. Our students are eagerly waiting to learn from your wealth of experience and the knowledge that would be shared this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. It's an honor and privilege to me. Right now, I'm standing in the Grand Gallery of the Swedish Parliament. This is the room that twines together the 2 chambers in the old 2-chamber system in the Swedish Parliament. Nowadays, we have a 1-chamber system, but we have kept the old rooms and used them for different meetings. And This grand gallery that I'm standing in was where the members of the upper chamber, and the second chamber, the lower chamber, had their working spaces, their meetings, their coffee, their rests even, because they had no private offices until we reorganized the parliament to becoming a one-chamber system in 1971. I will talk a little bit about these occasions in my presentation. I'm going to take you on a journey in the Swedish democracy history, starting with where we are today, and also telling you how we came to the point where we are at the moment. What were the occasions, what were the methods, the achievements that were made on the way, and what was actually laying the foundation for a strong democracy that we have here in Sweden. And I have prepared a presentation that hopefully you will be able to show now from Nigeria.
Yes, we'll bring that up shortly.
And I'm happy to see that so many are participating tonight. I guess it's Friday night and a special night also in Nigeria. We have just ended today's session in the chamber. Was 17 different interpellations to 5 or 6 of the different ministers. Interpellations posed by different members of the parliament, and having a debate with different ministers on the issues that the members wants to bring up then and have questions about and want to have a debate about. So that is what we have been doing today here in the parliament. And in parallel to that, there is always a meeting in the European Union committee in the parliament also. Okay. Can we have the presentation in a wide format instead of this mobile phone format?
All right, sir. Please give me a minute.
By all means. Depending on the size of your screens where you are watching this now, if you have a bigger screen, you can also see that on the walls here in the Grand Gallery, there are different portraits on the walls. And those portraits here at the Grand Gallery are portraits of previous speakers of the Swedish Parliament. Now we're getting somewhere. Excellent, excellent. And what you see here is actually the top of the building where I am at the moment. This is the top of the Parliament building that was built between 1895 and 1905. And within this building is the first chamber, the second chamber, and the Grand Gallery, and a lot of offices also. In today's parliamentary life, in this building, in this part of the building, we have the different committees in the Swedish Parliament. There are 15 committees and the EU committee also, which is on top of it, so to say. And we take the next slide, please. Yeah, excellent. To give a description about Sweden today. Today, Sweden is the 14th richest country in the world if you calculate the gross product of the per capita. So we're not the biggest economy, not even the 14th biggest economy in the world, but if you look at the wealth distributed per inhabitant in the country, we have 62,000 US dollars per capita in GDP then. I see here that I have perhaps misspelled GDP actually, but it's supposed to be GDP. The 14th richest country in the world, and actually in the beginning of the 1970s, Sweden was the richest country in the world. And we have slided down on this list during the past 40, 45 years, not by becoming poorer, but because of other countries have grown their wealth and surpassed us by that. There are a number of indexes in the world describing the world, and I have gathered some of them here. When it comes to the index of religious freedom in different countries, Sweden ranks as the number 10, the 10th most liberal country when it comes to religious freedom. And there are a vast number of different faiths in Sweden and in the Swedish society. And that also creates an interesting environment, and there are a lot of religious people, although the country in itself, I would say, today is quite secular. We are, when we look at the index of happiness, there are indexes for that too in the world. We are the 5th happiest country in the world. It's not that we are strolling along the streets laughing all the time, but it's an index describing the mood of people in different countries. And Sweden, often described as a rather dark and gloomy country, especially during the winter. It might surprise some that we, after all, are rather happy all the year long. When it comes to democracy, Sweden ranks as the number 3 in the world by the newspaper The Economist's Democracy Index. And there are also other indexes describing democracy and rating democracy in different countries. And Sweden ranks high in all of those and is considered being a so-called liberal democracy, for instance, in the index that is created by the VDEM Institute at Gothenburg University. When it comes to human rights index, Sweden ranks as the number 2 in the world, quite a good position, one would say. And when it comes to social justice and equality, we are the number 1 in the world. And I would say that all these indexes shows something of how Sweden is today, but it has definitely not been like this all the time in Sweden. This is a development that occurred during 100 or 150 years that took us to this position on these different indexes. I would say that the Swedish economy is an important founding stone of all of the wealth and democracy in Sweden. We are since long a very export-oriented country with a small but open economy, 10 million people. That doesn't create a big economy in total, but so that is why we're considered being a small economy. But we are very export-oriented, and 50% of everything that is produced in Sweden, both goods and services, goes on export. We have a number of world brands that are Swedish, or at least of a Swedish heritage. I have listed some of them, and there are actually many, many more. And some of them would probably be rather sad that I haven't included them in the list. Many of these companies are industrial companies delivering equipment to industry, to farming, to mining and other rather heavy duty industry and work areas. And Sweden have a long tradition in supplying different machines and tools for industry and other areas nearby industry sector. And we also have the world's oldest national treasury, Sveriges Riksbank. It was founded in the year 1668. It was actually founded after an economic breakdown of a predecessor, the Stockholm Banco, that was founded some years earlier. The founder of this was actually a man from Estonia, or rather Latvia, actually. Latvia, he was coming from Riga. And back in the 17th century, that was a part of Sweden, actually. So he founded what became then the National Treasury, and which is today the oldest one in the world. Three of the, you're a little bit too quick. Could we please move back? Three of the world brands that I pointed out specifically is perhaps a more publicly well-known in different parts of the world, not necessarily in your country, but they are brands that people often are familiar with and have a relation to in many cases. And at least IKEA is by many considered being very, very Swedish. And actually, it's also a place for Swedes to go when we are abroad and get hungry and are starting to longing for Swedish meatballs and other traditional Swedish courses. Then we can go to the IKEA, the furniture company, and go to their restaurant and have a proper Swedish meal, actually. Spotify is for listening to music and pods and other things. You might have been familiar with it. And Volvo is the car and heavy equipment and buses and lorry company. And there actually is two parts of Volvo today. One is owned by the Chinese and one is owned by the Swedish stock market. The personal cars have a Chinese ownership, and the rest of the Volvo brand, so to say, when it comes to heavy equipment, trucks, lorries, and boat motors and other things, is then owned on the Stockholm Exchange, the stock market then. Now we can go to the next slide. Voter turnouts, that is an interesting figure to look at when you try to understand the level of democracy in a country. How much does the population engage in the democracy? Sweden is a country that has a rather high voter turnout, and you see here for the past elections, the past 20 years, I was elected to the parliament the first time in 2002, so I started the line there, so to say, and you see that it has varied between 80 and 87% during these years. And voting in Sweden is not mandatory. In some countries it is, but here it is right, but it's voluntary to take part in the elections. And when we have elections at the same day for both the local level, the regional level, and the national level. This joint election day have created a strong voter turnout on all these levels. You can see in other countries that have separate election days for local and national elections, that in many cases, in many countries with that kind of system, there is a lower turnout, most usually in the local elections, but sometimes the opposite also. I have to move a little bit here to get the light on in the room now, but it worked well. As I said earlier, Sweden is a rather small country when it comes to the size of the population. 10.5 million people living in Sweden, but at a very huge area. The fifth largest country in Europe, according to area. The biggest country in Europe, that is Russia, and then one should consider that Russia is both a European and Asian country, but if you count them as a European country, they are the biggest one. In this rather lowly populated country with only 10.5 million inhabitants, but a huge distance in the country, we have 349 seats in the parliament. From time to time, there are debates in Sweden that is too many for such a small country when it comes to considering the population. But the fact is that the most northern parts of Sweden, or even the northern half part of Sweden, if we should decrease the number of seats in parliament, for instance, to 249, as often is suggested in such debates, that would create a situation where it would be a very, very huge distance to cover for these MPs when they should interact with their constituency up in the northern part of Sweden. So that is one of the reasons that we, at least still, stick to having rather many seats in the parliament. And when we have the elections for the parliament, we do that in 29 different constituencies. And as you see, they vary a lot in size. The smallest constituency, the island of Gotland in the Baltic archipelago, has 2 seats, and the largest constituency is the constituency surrounding the Stockholm city. Stockholm city is its own constituency, but the 26, I believe it is today, communities around Stockholm, they have 43 seats to distribute. And in the parliament today, there is 8 parties. There is a threshold, 4% threshold to enter the parliament. So I believe the smallest party have 16 or 18 or something like that of the 349 seats. And the largest party, the Social Democrats, they have 107 seats. And in between there are 6 other parties then. And given the smallest constituency, the Gotland Island, with only 2 seats, the representation from Gotland is consisting of the 2 biggest parties there. And the other parties, they are active there, they have candidates and they have politicians in the local politics on Gotland, both on the local community level and on the regional level, but they don't get any representation in the parliament. But in our election system, we have a combination to get these 349 seats with 300 fixed seats and 49 seats that are distributed to even out the results. So the total election result in Sweden, when you count it down, you should get a distribution in the end of the 349 seats, giving a proportional representation for the parties in the election that gives a combination in the parliament out of these 8 parties that have passed the 4% threshold, and that it is proportionally distributed in a fair way. So in the end, even if you vote for a party, for example, on Gotland Island, which doesn't take any seats from Gotland, your vote is important and aggregates to the votes for that smaller party in total in Sweden. So you get a representation for your party, but perhaps, well, in the Gotland case, not from Gotland, but from somewhere else then. So every vote really counts, I would say, and that is important in our election system. And I think that the fact that we have this proportional system and also distribute the number of seats in a very fair way is also a reason why we have this high output in the voter turnout. Because in countries where you see, for instance, a majority system, and usually there is 2 parties taking almost all the seats, in many of those countries you have a much lower turnout of voters than you have in our system with a proportional distribution of the seats in the parliament. We can go to the next slide. The right to vote wasn't something that was given from one day to another, and there are a number of years marking the development of the right to vote in Sweden. we are often talking about, and especially a couple of years ago, when it was the 100th anniversary of the right to vote for females, equal suffrage, then we were talking a lot about the anniversary then for the right to vote. But to be honest, it was not all the population back in 1919 that had the right to vote. And there have been amendments of different groups since then. And the last group that was added was in 1989, when people with learning disabilities were added to have the right to vote. And before that, in local and regional elections, foreign residents in Sweden were given the right to vote in those local and regional elections. And they have to have been living here in Sweden permanently for 3 years at least to be given the right to vote in the local elections. It's used by them, but it varies a lot between different ethnical groups and what country they come from, whether they take part in the local elections or not. Finnish migrants, for instance, living in Sweden is often in a rather high degree taking part in the elections, other groups in a lower number. The voting age have been changed several times for more than 100 years, and today it is 18 years and has been so since 1975. So the first election where 18-year-olds could vote in the elections was in the election 1976. And since we changed to this one-chamber system that we have today, as I described, we have had also a joint election day. And that joint election day then affected when the local and regional elections were held and are held then. Also, I think an important reasons for why we have this high output when it comes to voter participation in the elections. And only 6 years before we lowered the voting age to 18 years, it was lowered to 19 years in 1969. As I said, it has been gradually been changing over time. You will see more examples of this. The year before that, in 1968, we, for the first time, gave Swedish citizens living abroad the possibility to vote in the elections, and they were then given the voting possibility by mail then. And today we have a rather large organization and activity to give the possibility for Swedish citizens living abroad to take part in the elections. And I would say it's quite popular. It can be both people that are residing in principle permanently in some other country. It can be people who are temporarily working in another country. It has from time to time also been Swedish soldiers taking part in different international UN-led and NATO-led operations. So it's a big variety of the people that take part in the elections abroad, as you understand. And just 3 years before that, the voting age was lowered to 20 years. But a more important change that was made was when the group of voters were widened in 1948, because initially, when the right to vote, the equal suffrage, was established, people who were in bankruptcy or were imprisoned, or actually also in poverty care, living in almshouse, they were not allowed to take part in the elections before 1948. The females, they were given the right to vote. The first election that they participated in was in 1919, but actually the change of the legislation was made in 1917. We can take the next slide. Yes, and I have to correct myself there a little bit, mixing up the years, because it's a several years long process of introducing the equal suffrage, and that's why I'm mixing up the years now. Sorry for that. We passed the law in 1919. That is the correct, but the first steps towards that was taken in 1917. The first elections where females were taking part was in 1921, and 5 females were elected into the parliament. The basis for the Swedish election system is that if you have the right to vote, you're also electable. So as a foreigner living in Sweden and have been doing that for 3 years or more, and have the right to vote in the local and regional elections, that also gives you the possibility to take part in the elections as a candidate. And especially in the local communities, you can often find people who doesn't have a Swedish citizenship, but are elected into the local council then in the local community. To become a member of the parliament, you of course have to be a Swedish citizen, but you can have a dual citizenship, or even in some rare cases a triple citizenship. There is no boundary in the Swedish legislation against having a membership and a citizenship in another country. And we have a number of migrants in Sweden, or people with migrant background in Sweden, that comes from countries where you can't actually denounce your citizenship in that country. So it's important for their integration and their possibilities that we have this possibility to have a dual or even triple citizenship. It's very rare that you have a triple one. Then probably your parents come from 2 different countries and you're born here in Sweden, or at least have been given a Swedish citizenship after an application. But this process, a little bit more than 100 years ago, to introduce equal suffrage, that was a long and rather harsh, from time to time, debate here in Sweden. You see the picture that I have put in here. That is from one manifestation in Gothenburg more than 100 years ago. Women demonstrating and marching for their right to have equal voting rights. And Gothenburg is on the west coast of Sweden. It's the second largest city, and I live just north of it. So 4 decades of debate, advocacy, and activism, and collecting names, and really fighting for getting the issue up on the agenda. And there was rather harsh resistance among many, among those who had the power back then, to give women the right to vote. And it was highly questioned by conservatives back in those days. Today it's totally accepted and is something that is considered being very, very Swedish. And no one is, or at least extremely few, is questioning it today. That was the decision that was made in 1919 was preceded by a decision in 1909 giving equal rights to vote for men. And as you see, the voting age back then was 24 years. And this is an interesting part of the debate on the equal right to vote, because the ones who joined in that debate and was advocating for it was the Liberals and the Social Democrats. But the Social Democrats from the beginning was more focused and might even could say solely focused on having equal rights to vote for men. and from the beginning didn't consider it being that important for female voting rights. But the liberals, they were strong on that and was arguing for it during several decades, and they managed to convince the Social Democrats that equal rights to vote shouldn't only be for men, but also for both sexes, and both for men and women then. So they, during the long struggle for equal rights to vote, joined forces, and when it was finally decided and introduced, that was because of the work from the liberals and the Social Democrats. But there were differences even between those two movements in the beginning of the debate and fight for democracy and equal rights to vote. The equal right to vote was preceded by the 1866 Constitution, and which stipulated a bicameral system with, as I described previously, the rooms that are outside this grand gallery. The first upper chamber, where you voted according to income, and that was also a voting on a scale. So with a small income over the threshold, you got 1 vote, and if you had a very high income, you got 40 votes. The second and lower chamber, that down there, it was voting according to income or property or wealth. So a lot of farmers with bigger farms, they had not that big incomes, but they were owning property, and because of that, they were granted the possibility to vote to the second chamber then. And this was something that went on for several decades in Sweden. It was not democratic as we see it today, but I think it was a vital step towards what was to come later on then with equal suffrage, that actually there were votings and one started to opening up a more democratic system already in 1866, although it was not, or it was far from democracy as we think of democracy in today's world, I would say. We go to the next slide. I would say that there are a number of things that the democracy in Sweden is based upon, not only the equal suffrage, because there are a number of institutional frameworks that has been of great importance for laying a foundation for a working democracy. Having the equal opportunities to vote is not the only thing that creates a democracy in my mind. The fact that people got the right and even were actually forced to get an elementary education in elementary school that was introduced in 1842 to actually guarantee kids to get some education and making it mandatory. So by that keeping them out of starting to work as child labor in industries and farming. Many of them, they had to work also, even that they were going to school, they had to be working too. I'm trying to get the light on here now. I'm not very successful in that, and that's a later problem. Making elementary school mandatory, and the biggest achievement, I would say, with the elementary school was that people in Sweden, all people in Sweden, got to be taught and get the ability to read, creating a literacy in Swedish society that was extremely important for what should come later when people started to organize and starting to engage. And another institutional framework that is important for democracy is independent courts. So it's not from 1809, it's not any longer courts controlled by politicians or by the king or the government or something. The courts are independent and they work according to the laws that are legislated and should do that in an independent way. The first steps towards religious freedom in Sweden, which is also important for laying a foundation for the democracy in Sweden. We will come to that a little bit later on, because the churches have been important in the development of democracy in Sweden. So in 1779, the first steps were taken towards religious freedom. The final law that gave a total religious freedom in Sweden was passed in 1958, so it's quite some time in between, as you see. But one of the first steps, even before there was some legislation stipulating religious freedom, was that Judaism was allowed in specific free trade areas back in 1775. So actually, outside where I live, north of Gothenburg, there is an island that was a free trade area, and Jews were allowed to settle down there in 1775. So we're actually this year commemorating the 250th year of Jewish life in Sweden. One other institutional framework that I think is extremely important for the democracy and its development in Sweden is the Freedom of Press Act, which was the first one to be adopted in the world when it was adopted in 1765, 1766. And actually, what you see a picture of here to the right on this slide is the original of the decision and the protocol in the Swedish parliament back then. A totally different parliamentary system that compared to what we have today. But this is a protocol and from the decision, and one finds the text for this Freedom of Press Act in this protocol. And actually, this picture I took just the other day, because this is from a newly inaugurated exhibition that we have here in the Parliament to show the different founding documents of the Swedish democracy. The constitution in Sweden is a composition of several different acts that together creates the Swedish constitution. And the Freedom of the Press Act is the first one of them, and is in many senses the most vital of them, because this Freedom of Press Act gave the opportunity for spreading the word in print and in writing, because printing presses weren't cheap and easily accessible back in those days still, but so a lot of texts were actually copied by writing them and by that being able to distribute them in several copies. But still, the fact that you could write what you want is something very important. And in this Freedom of the Press Act also comes the transparency, the right to have access to different documents in the society, to see what is actually decisions made upon, what facts have been used, what is actually the input, so to say, in today's language, when you make a decision. And transparency is a vital part of this. Sweden is well known for its very broad transparency. Actually, when we entered the European Union, there were some critics in Sweden that was worried that EU membership actually would limit transparency in Sweden. On the other hand, there were people in the European Union that were actually worried about letting Sweden into the European Union because they thought that we will reveal all the secrets of the European Union according to our transparency legislation that we have in Sweden. I would say that the reality ended up somewhere in between, to be honest. Let's go to the next slide. Institutional framework is one thing that is very important, but I would say that civil society framework is the other important cornerstone or leg for Swedish democracy. And this was a very important development that happened during the 19th century. And it also relates to what I was talking about on the other slide, for instance, on religious freedom, because you see here that the first Baptist church was established in Sweden in 1848. And that is something that is extremely vital and important to the development of democracy in Sweden. In the 1880s and 90s, some of the political parties that still are active and here in the parliament were founded. There had been parties before that, but they were mainly created after you entered parliament. You got elected first, and then you found some friends in the parliament in the old system and created a party together with them. What happens in the 1880s and 90s is that people gather in people's movements and start parties together on a local level. And then there are several local parties started, and then they organize in regional and national parties and build the party organization from bottom and up then. And many of the ones who were founding parties back in those days were actually people coming from the sobriety movement. The sobriety movement was started also in the 1880s. They were growing rapidly in those years because there had and still was a big problem in Sweden with drinking and use of alcohol. This was in a time where people, mainly people working in the farming sector, got some of their payment in hard alcohol, in vodka and other hard alcohols. And there was a huge consumption in Sweden back in those days. Today we have a very controlled system and distribution monopoly that is state controlled. We have that since long, and that is because of these big problems with drinking in Sweden that were existing in the 18th and 19th century. The sobriety movement, they came, many of them, from these Baptist churches that was founded in different areas of the Swedish country and countryside, and in cities also. There was a Swedish national church and for long a state Christian religion, but that was step by step liberalized, you could say. And when the first Baptist churches were founded, that was founded by people locally. And that gave them the both need and opportunity to organize themselves, to start learning how to organize, how to hold a meeting, to make decisions in their local church organization in a democratic way. And that was a very vital education for people on practical democracy. And these people active in the Baptist church, they used these skills and knowledges when they founded the sobriety movement. And then they went on, many of them, to form also political parties. So these three, the Baptist churches, the sobriety movement, and the political parties, they are extremely interlinked in the Swedish history, and especially from 1850, you could say, up until 1950, they have a lot of connections with each other. And up until the 1950s, actually a majority between, you could say, perhaps between 1900 and 1950, in the Swedish parliament, a majority of the members of the Swedish parliament, they were actually people who have given a sobriety declaration that they were not drinking and had promised not to be drinking. So it was only after 1950 that actually that shifted and became a majority of people that were at least sometimes using alcohol and drinking it. So this is something that can't be overestimated, its importance for democracy in Sweden, because getting people organized, getting them sober, getting them educated, getting them working together practically with democracy on the local level, that created a very stable foundation for building democracy in Sweden. And at this time also, the first trade unions were founded on local level in different branches. The first ones were in the newspaper printing industry that was growing at the time, and where the working conditions were rather poor, but many people were working, and they joined together and formed trade unions. And later on, different trade unions founded the National Confederation, the LO as it's called in Swedish, the Trade Union Conference, you could say in English. That was founded in 1898 by a number of national trade unions covering different branches of industries, and also farming and printing and forestry. The LO is still the strongest union confederation in Sweden, with a huge number of members, and plays a vital role still in the Swedish society. But it's not only about people organizing themselves, it's also one other thing that I think is important in the civil society framework, and that is also the legislation that is passed in 1848, giving the opportunity to form companies in the form of limited companies or incorporated companies, because this is a big step in the economical freedom and giving foundation what is coming in 1864, when there is a law passed in the parliament for economic freedom, that anybody could start a business, because that was also contributing to democracy and giving people the power over their own lives in Sweden. So I would say that the civil society development during the 19th century in both religion, in trade unions, in parties, and also in businesses and companies is extremely important for what we have today, and how we have become, as I showed you in the beginning, the 14th richest country in the world, and the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a number of indexes of different things that you think is positive with a country to have. We go to the next slide. And that is actually a picture of the parliament. The square house that you see is the parliamentary building where I'm at the moment in the Grand Gallery. The half circle part of the building, that is actually where we nowadays have the plenary hall for the one chamber that we have today, the joint chamber that we have. And the chamber is actually on the top of the building where you see the roof of this half circular building. And that half circular building is actually previously the headquarter of the National Treasury, the first national treasury in the world. That was their office up until the one chamber system was adopted in 1971. These two houses were closed for renovation and redecoration and rebuilding. And the National Treasury, they built a new house some blocks away from here, and all of these two buildings were remodeled to be able to use for the new one-chamber Swedish parliament. So we moved back to these houses in 1983. So for 12 years, 13 years, we were temporarily in another building that is now the Stockholm Cultural House, some blocks away from here at the Sergels Torg, Sergels Square. And by that, I end my presentation. I was actually making it a little bit quicker than I thought, I have to admit. But I'm sure and convinced that you have a number of questions, and I'm very eager and willing to answer your questions. And I will also try to make some moves here in the room, in the Grand Gallery, so we actually get a little bit more light on my face. I think that could be useful. So, the floor is open.
All right, thank you so much, sir. That has been very insightful learning about Sweden today. It's interesting to note that Sweden is actually number 5 among the world's happiest country and number 1 on gender equality. That's really impressive. And I just got to find out today that Spotify is actually an app that was created from Sweden. That's really interesting. Thank you so much for the presentation, sir. So we'll just take questions now. If you have any question, just indicate with a show of hands. We'll take just 5 so that our facilitator can go back to his business. He's very busy, but he has made out time to be with us this evening, so we wouldn't want to keep him for too long. So please make sure that your question is straight to the point and very brief. I'll take Jessica now. Jessica, I've asked you to unmute.
Can we close the presentation, perhaps?
Thank you very much. Good evening, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your presentation, and it has been very insightful. I have 2 short questions. The first is looking at the parliament in Sweden. For a 10.5 million population of people, you have 346 seats representing that's people representing the population. And then Nigeria of over 200 million people, we have just 469 members. Now, is it safe to say that the people are inadequately represented in Nigeria? That's my first question. The second question is, Sweden was able to achieve an independent judiciary, like the courts are now independent in Sweden. And in Nigeria, one of the things we are clamoring for is for an independent judiciary. How was Sweden able to achieve this independent judiciary? Because, well, the principle of he who pays the piper dictates the tune usually in Nigeria. So how was Sweden able to achieve that? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the questions. The representation and the rate, so to say, between the number of MPs and the population, I think that one thing that really should be considered in the Swedish case is that Sweden is geographically a very distant country, very, very distant country. It even affects the climate. The climate is totally different in the south of Sweden compared to the north of Sweden. The light even, this time of the year in the high north of Sweden, in a couple of weeks, they will have 15 or even 12 minutes of sunlight. That's the day for them up in the high north of Sweden. In the south, we will have daylight during 5-6 hours at least in the most southern parts, even perhaps even more than that. So it's a country that have a lot of different conditions. And that is creating a unique foundation for how to create representation. Another thing I think is that the workload for parliamentarians. I think that one of the things that would happen if we should decrease the number of MPs in Sweden is that we would increase the workload rather drastically for the MPs that are left, actually, so to say. So I think that it's not only an issue of how many you are representing, it's also how are the possibilities to cover the area, what is the practical workload, what is really has to be carried out. So I don't think that there is a specific formula to say what is the perfect number of MPs and the perfect number of representation. One has to look at the conditions, the unique conditions for every country. I don't think that there is a right or wrong in this, so to say. One has to find a solution that one feels is suitable for the country that it's about, so to say. The freedom or the courts in Sweden then and acting on their own, that is actually a political struggle that we're going back and forth for, and also the struggle of power and democracy in Sweden is something that has been going back and forth during several hundred years in Sweden. Sweden is still a kingdom. We have a king, but the king since 1974 has no political power at all, none whatsoever. And he's not allowed, a king is a he, but we also have, we know that when he passes, there will be a queen, because the oldest of his children is a female. So then we will have the today crown princess becoming the Queen of Sweden. They are not allowed to take any political positions or make any political statements. And this is a big change over time, because if you look back in Swedish history, you can see that the struggle for power have been going on for several hundred years in Sweden. Not only the struggle for having democracy and equal suffrage, but also should it be power of the king or should it be the power of the parliament? And there are times in history when the power of the king is weakened and the power of the parliament and the government is strengthened. And then there are after that times where the power of the king is strengthened and the power of the government and the parliament is weakened. And this goes back and forth during several hundred years in the Swedish political history. And today's situation was actually created at the same time as we had the decisions on equal suffrage. And there were a situation in the 1914 to 1917, one could say, in Sweden, when there was a huge problem of starvation, and there was the struggle of the political power, not only a struggle about the right to vote, but also a struggle about how much power should the king have. And the king tried to grab control, so to say, but was challenged by the politicians and the parliamentarians. And vital in that challenge back in those days was the Liberal Party and the Social Democratic Party. And there were huge demonstrations and manifestations here in Stockholm, both in favor of the king and in favor of having a parliamentary democracy. And it ended with a victory for the parliamentary democracy, that it shouldn't be solely about the king's power, it should be a more shared power, and that was the way it was. And the power of the king was step by step decreasing. And when we made the decision on the new constitution in 1974, that was actually making decisions that was creating legislation to what we were already doing in practice since several decades then. I have a technical problem at the moment because my computer suddenly says that I don't have any power, which is odd because I'm connected to the power cord here in the room. I think I have solved that problem. So that's a long answer to your question about the court system in Sweden. Next question, please.
All right, thank you so much. That was very insightful. Next, we'll take Manasseh. Manasseh, I've asked you to unmute. Remember to keep your questions straight to the point.
Good evening.
Good evening, we can hear.
All right. My question has to do with religion. See, in Sweden, they talk about freedom of religion, complete freedom. So when they talk about this freedom of religion in Sweden, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, since 2000, the state and the Swedish church are separated. And even before that, as you saw, there was a legislation passed in 1951 that was pointing out the legal right to pray to any god or gods that you want, to be a member of any religious belief and organization that you want. There is a total freedom of that, and there are more religions present in the Swedish society than I even could remember. Since we have 20% of the population in Sweden have a migrant background, we have a lot of people that have fled from countries with religious oppression and come here to be able to stick to the faith that they have and want to keep. And this is, in a way, a little bit ironic also, because back in the Swedish history, we had a situation between 1850 and 1925, mainly, where a huge part of the Swedish population fled from Sweden. Most of them went to the United States, but some made way to other countries. They fled out of Sweden because of starvation, because of disastrous harvests in the agricultural sector, so they couldn't live on their crops because there were no harvests. And they also fled from Sweden due to the religious oppression that was still in those days, even though we had long before that started to, with very small steps, liberalize the possibility to have a different belief. But these Baptist churches that started to organize in 1848, the first one, and many of them in the decades to come, they were quite harshly treated in the Swedish society in the beginning, for several decades, and they were harassed by the Swedish state church, and that made a lot of people actually to go from Sweden. Many of them went, as I said, to the United States. But in today's Swedish society, you can find Christian churches of different orientations in Christianity. It's the Catholic Church, it's the Protestant Church, it's Baptist churches of different kinds. You find mosques, you find synagogues, you find different religious buildings and different religious congregations in Sweden, and mainly you find them in the bigger cities, not as much in the countryside, because most of the migrants people with migrant background of some kind live in rural areas in general. And I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a try to answer it at least.
All right, thank you so much, sir. We have a question in the chat box. Shadrach is asking that during your presentation, you mentioned that foreigners have the right to vote after 3 years of residency in Sweden. He's asking how many years a foreigner has to reside in Sweden before they are eligible to apply for Swedish citizenship.
I don't remember by heart, but it's not that many years. It's quite a few years, and there is an ongoing debate in the Swedish politics today about whether these thresholds, both for having the right to vote in local and regional elections and the threshold for being able to apply for Swedish citizenship, if that should be, those thresholds should be raised. But the demands today, I don't remember exactly how many years it is for citizenship, but some think it's too easy to acquire a Swedish citizenship today, and there is a discussion then both about increasing the threshold, but also to put in specific demands for knowledge in Swedish language and knowledge about the Swedish society. So you should take a test both in Swedish and a test on political science, you could say, about how the Swedish society is functioning. That is an ongoing debate. It's too early to say where that will end up, if the demands will be increased in the years to come, but it's not impossible that it will be. Sorry that I can't say the specific number of years.
No problem, sir. I'm sure he will be able to do the research himself. Okay, so Elvis is asking, in addition to the previous question, that what is the reason for the inclusion? Why after 3 years?
Well, the reason why we wanted to include people of foreign background is to integrate them more into the Swedish society. And we think, and the thinking when the legislation was passed in 1976 was that if we could manage to integrate people into the local level of the Swedish society, that is a very good way for them to get more connected in the Swedish society and take part more in the society. And we had a number especially in the 1960s and early 1970s, the Swedish industry was booming, and there was a lack of workforce in Sweden. So big Swedish companies actually went to other countries, both the other Nordic countries, but also, for instance, to Turkey, Yugoslavia, Poland, and other countries, Italy, Portugal, and tried to recruit people there. And there were recruitment activities, sending down buses, picking up people on Friday, driving them, for instance, from Yugoslavia, today then Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, Serbia, and so on, driving them during the weekend to Sweden and putting them into the production industry on Monday morning. They didn't know a single word of Swedish, but they got established in the Swedish society and they got to learn Swedish, many back in those days on their own, not much help given them. The thinking was, when we introduced this in 1976, that we wanted to get people more integrated into society and give them an open door into the Swedish society and make them more an active part of the society. That was the thinking and still is, I would say.
All right. Thank you so much for the response. And now our last question from Prosper. Prosper, I've asked you to unmute. Please go ahead.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Kenneth, and good evening, class. Okay, my question is, two questions actually. First one is, we discovered in the course of the training that Sweden, the smaller region has 2 representatives, and the biggest region has like 40 something representatives. Now, how secured are the people with the smaller representative? How secured are they? Then number 2 question is, we also saw that your income determines the house you'll be running for, either the lower house or the upper house. Why is it so? Thank you very much.
Well, the number of seats are distributed to the 29 different constituencies according to the size of the population in that constituency. My constituency, for instance, 11 communities around Gothenburg, the second largest city on the west coast in Sweden and on the west coast of Sweden. These 11 communities, we have 11 permanent members and, according to the last election result, 3 extra members to even out the result to be proportional for the total national. Now I have to move a little bit to get the light on again. Sorry for that. Bear with me for a second. There it is. This is a system to bring down the consumption of electricity in the parliament. I think that people are rather confident with getting represented from the area where they live. And I would say that in all constitutions, in all the constituencies, the MPs are quite well known to the public, except for in the 2 bigger cities, Stockholm area, and Gothenburg, and the Gothenburg area, because they are so densely populated and they are, in my opinion, underreported by the regional newspapers. In other parts of Sweden, the regional newspapers and regional news agencies, mainly than the regional radio broadcasting, they are following very closely the work of the MPs from the constituency. For me as an MP, and even as previously chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and nowadays as a First Deputy Speaker, I have a hard time getting into the news outlets in my constituency because they are focusing so very much on the government level and the ministers of the government, and they hardly write about or make radio programs about the MPs from the area that they are covering. I have been very critical of them for that for, 20, 25 years, all the way that since I tried to come into the parliament the first time and then when I entered and so on. But in other areas of Sweden, MPs are very well known in the local society through the local and regional media outlets of different kinds. And I think that that makes people rather safe and confident that we are represented and we know who to call when we have opinions about things. And we get a lot of emails nowadays from people in the constituencies bringing up different issues and problems and needs that they have. The second question, sorry, I forgot it. Can you please repeat it?
Okay, could you repeat your question? Prosper, I've asked you to unmute.
Okay, so the second question is, I said, why is it that your income determines the house you are eligible to run in? For instance, your income determines whether you are going to go to the upper house or the lower house. Why is it so?
Well, the two-chamber system, the bi-chamber system, that is the old system up until 1970. Nowadays, we have a one-chamber system. The old system with two chambers, one was directly elected, the second chamber, and one was indirectly elected by the regions, the upper chamber, the first chamber. And as in many bichamberal systems, they had to work with the legislations and it had to be passed in both chambers in that old system. And the working methods and division into different committees were perhaps somewhat different between the two chambers. But in the end, to pass a law, you had to get it passed in both chambers, as in many bichamberal systems. I don't know whether that answers your question.
Yes, I'm sure it does. Okay, I'll just take one last question that was just dropped in the chat box, and that will be all for tonight. So someone is asking that are Swedish politicians allowed to work? And as a politician, do they earn enough to be influential and wealthy? He's comparing this to Nigeria, where many politicians rely on politics as a full-time job.
Thank you for the question. This is a very interesting question. And sometimes I compare to a country that we are often mixed up with, and that is Swiss. The Alp country making watches and cheese and chocolates. We are the Nordic country making cars and furnitures and so on. That is a joke that we used to make between Swedes and people from Swiss. Swiss have a very interesting system where for very long MPs in the Swiss parliament have been having the seat in the parliament and that work as a part-time obligation, and were supposed to have an ordinary work at the same time. That has changed lately in Swiss. In the Swedish case, there is no legislation prohibiting us from having an occupation at the same time as we are politicians and members of parliament. Although since we travel from many of us at least, travels from very different distant areas. We come here to Stockholm generally on Monday night or Tuesday morning, and we stay here generally to Thursday night or Friday morning, depending on where we live in the country, and which are the possibilities to travel back and forth between home and Stockholm. So most MPs, they go back and forth every week between their home city, their constituency, and being here in the parliament. And that perhaps doesn't give an ideal possibility to combine this with a civil work then. But some do, actually. I have a former colleague here in the parliament from another party. He is a dentist by profession, and he was actually working at as a dentist at his old job, so to say, every summer, and by that helping out his colleagues with their scheduling of the vacation for them during summertime. So he made it a little bit easier for them to have vacation during summer, and at the same time he could keep his knowledge and skills in the profession, in his profession then as a dentist. So I would say that that was a very interesting combination of work and obligation as a parliamentarian. But and we had during the pandemic some years ago, some of the people working originally in the healthcare sector, they actually volunteered, so to say, to go back to their workplaces, hospitals, and medical institutions to work part-time there to help out in the extreme workload that was because of the pandemic then with the COVID pandemic some years ago. Then we also have some others that are working part-time in their original professions. We have one doctor, for instance, he's a children's doctor, and I know that he works a little bit from time to time taking care of children. He's specialized in child health care, so he's quite vital to the hospital where he originally had been working before he entered the parliament. And there are several others also. So some combines it, but I would say in general, being a MP in the Swedish parliament, that is more than a full-time task that you carry out, especially considering the travels back and forth. And generally, when we are here in the parliament, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we tend to pack the days from early in the morning to very late in the night. And then we go home to our constituency, and then we have a lot of meetings during Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, with the party organization, the local society, public meetings with the electorate, and you should also try to get some time with your family, your kids and other relatives. So being a parliamentarian in Sweden, that is more than a full-time occupation, I would say. And I would say that all 349 are working very hard and are very, very engaged also in what they are doing. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I'm sure it does. Thank you so much, sir. It has been such an insightful and inspiring session, learning about Sweden and its democracy and, you know, the wins it has had over the years. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It was such a pleasure. On behalf of the board of Electoral College Nigeria and the executive director, I want to say a big thank you. I also want to appreciate the Embassy of Sweden here in Abuja, who were the link, you know, to get across to you. So I'll just allow one of the representatives just say a brief thank you.
I don't know if I'm audible and visible. It's a bit dark outside. I just want to say a very big thank you to the first of the speaker, Kenneth Forslund. Tack så jättemycket, as I say in Swedish.
Tack så mycket.
Yes, really appreciate that you made the time, and I know it's outside of working hours, and we really do appreciate this. I followed from the start, and I must say it's like you literally transported people to Sweden, and they could understand the basics of what Sweden is. And here at the embassy, we continue to work very hard to support, you know, CSOs, NGOs like Electoral College, but also to shape democracy in Nigeria in ways that we can and to contribute to it. So we're very, very excited that you could bring the Swedish perspective to the fore this evening. Thank you so much once again, and well done to the team at Electoral College.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a privilege, and I've appreciated it a lot. And thank you for all the good questions also.
Thank you so much, sir. And thank you so much, Helena. Thank you for joining us along with the first deputy speaker this evening. Students, can we appreciate the first deputy speaker with our emojis in the chat box? And I'll just allow everyone just unmute. Say thank you before I end the class.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. And we hope you get to visit Nigeria sometime soon. It'll be good to host you in person. Okay, you're muted, actually. All right. Good night, everyone.